Alien Girl saw the human stand alone at the pass. His reason for staying shifted her entire view. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The wind howled through the narrow pass as Zara, a young alien woman, stood at the edge of the cliffs, gazing down at the treacherous snowfields below. Her kind, the Zalorians, had faced challenges her entire life. War, loss, and the cold indifference of a universe that saw them as weak. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about this place felt different. As the storm picked up, she tightened her grip on the railing, her violet skin shimmering slightly in the cold, the tips of her silver hair whipping around her face. Zara had been tracking a group of humans for days. She had heard their stories, their relentless drive, their unyielding spirit, but she had never seen it for herself. She had never seen one of them stand alone in the face of such a fierce storm. The human in question, a man named Jack, had been a part of the scouting party that Zara had watched from the distance. Unlike his comrades, who huddled for warmth and shelter, Jack had chosen to stand at the pass, facing the storm head-on. His reason? It was simple. He believed in something bigger than the cold. Zara couldn't understand it. Why would anyone willingly stand in such conditions, exposing themselves to the elements? Why would he sacrifice his warmth, his safety, for what? As Zara observed him from a distance, she noticed something strange, something that caught her off guard. Despite the harsh winds and the biting cold, Jack stood tall. He was alone, but his posture radiated a quiet strength. There was no fear in his stance, no hesitation. Zara's heart skipped a beat. What was it that made him stay there? Why didn't he retreat to safety like the others? She had to know. Drawing closer, Zara silently approached the human, staying hidden behind the rocks and snowdrifts. As she watched him, a part of her that she rarely listened to, the part that still believed in hope, started to stir. She was used to the cold, the harshness of the world around her, but something about Jack's actions stirred a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. The feeling of hope. As Zara drew nearer, she felt her breath catch in her throat. Jack's reason for staying was not just about survival. No, it was something deeper, something she hadn't expected to find. Zara had always believed that humans were driven by selfishness, by survival instincts alone. But here, standing in front of her, was a man whose actions told a different story. He wasn't just standing against the storm, he was standing for something. And in that moment, Zara realized that the world might not be as cold and indifferent as she had once thought. Jack turned his head, sensing something in the air. Zara froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Would he see her? Would he confront her? Or would he remain focused on whatever it was that kept him standing in the storm? In that split second, Zara's perception of him shifted completely. This human, this stranger, was not just a survivalist. He was a symbol of something greater. Something Zara had almost forgotten existed. Humanity's capacity for sacrifice and strength in the face of impossible odds. Zara hesitated, hidden just behind a snowdrift, as she watched Jack stand alone against the storm. His face was grim, his eyes squinting against the snow, but there was something about him, a determination that caught her off guard. She had seen soldiers fight, leaders command, but never had she witnessed someone stand so firm in the face of nature's wrath. The wind howled louder, carrying with it sharp ice crystals that stung her skin, yet Jack didn't flinch. He seemed to embrace it. He had no protection, no armor, nothing but his own will. Zara's mind raced. Was he really unbothered by the cold, or was he simply too proud to show weakness? She watched him closely, her heart racing as she began to understand. Jack wasn't standing against the storm for survival alone. He was standing for something greater, something she couldn't quite grasp. This was no act of mere defiance. No, this was a man determined to face the world head-on, no matter what it threw at him. As the storm intensified, Zara felt something shift within her. A small voice deep inside, a voice she thought she had silenced long ago, began to stir. Was this what humanity was truly about? Not survival, not domination, but something else, something far more compelling. She stepped out from behind the snowdrift, her footsteps barely making a sound in the thick snow. Jack didn't notice at first, too caught up in the storm, but when she was close enough to hear his labored breath, he turned sharply, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. Zara stopped. She wasn't here to fight. She wasn't here to cause trouble. Jack's eyes locked with hers, his expression unreadable for a moment. His gaze flickered to the blizzard around them and back to her, a faint recognition in his eyes. She wasn't a threat, not in the way he was trained to expect. Still, he didn't lower his weapon. Zara raised her hand slowly, showing him that she meant no harm. "I saw you," she said, her voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. "Why did you stay?" Jack's grip on his rifle loosened slightly, though he didn't let go of it completely. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because someone has to," he said simply. His voice was calm, as if the storm itself was nothing more than a passing nuisance. Zara was taken aback by the simplicity of his response. No grand speeches, no heroics, just a quiet certainty that made her question everything she had ever known about humans. "But why stand alone?" she pressed. "Because standing alone doesn't make you weak," he replied, his voice carrying an edge now, as if he was trying to make her understand something important. "Sometimes, it's the only way to protect the others." Zara frowned, confusion creeping into her mind. "Protect them? From the storm?" Jack shook his head. "From everything else. The storm is nothing. People, situations, those are the real battles." Zara's mind raced, trying to process what he was saying. Was it possible that humans didn't just fight for themselves? That they fought for something bigger than their own survival? She had never thought of it like that. On her planet, survival was the highest priority. People fought for their lives, their place in the world. But here, standing in front of this human, she saw something different. Zara took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving Jack's. "You're different," she said softly. Jack didn't respond at first, as if weighing her words carefully. Then, finally, he spoke. "I don't know if I'm different, but I know one thing. Sometimes, it's not about fighting for your life. It's about fighting for something that matters." Zara was quiet for a long time, letting his words settle in her mind. This human, Jack, was a mystery to her, a riddle she couldn't solve. But in that moment, as the storm continued to rage around them, she understood something about him that made her chest tighten. Maybe, just maybe, humans weren't as she had imagined them. Maybe there was more to them than just their endless wars and conquests. Maybe, just maybe, they had something to teach her about strength and sacrifice. The wind howled louder, but this time, Zara didn't mind. She was no longer afraid of it. Instead, she was curious about the man standing before her, this human who had no need for the storm to define him. The wind began to die down, leaving behind a hushed silence that seemed to echo through the vast expanse of the snowy pass. Zara stood there for a moment, still processing the conversation. She had never met anyone like Jack. The words he spoke lingered in her mind, like a puzzle she couldn't quite piece together. She had come to this place, this harsh and unforgiving land, seeking answers. But now she was beginning to wonder if the answers she sought were not in the stars, but in the person standing before her. Jack, however, seemed unfazed by the weight of their conversation. He adjusted the strap on his gear and glanced at her, his expression neutral but not unkind. "You've got questions," he said. "I can see it in your eyes." Zara blinked, snapping out of her thoughts. She wasn't used to being read so easily. "Why do you do it?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. "Why do you keep standing, even when you know it might be pointless?" Jack paused, his gaze turning to the horizon, where the storm clouds had started to break apart, revealing the faint outline of distant mountains. "Because sometimes," he began, his voice low, "you don't know if it's pointless until you try. Standing here, in this storm, it's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about doing what's right, no matter how hard it is." Zara felt a lump form in her throat. The simplicity of his words, the way they resonated with her own unspoken fears, left her momentarily speechless. She had always been driven by the need to survive, to protect her people, but this was different. Jack wasn't talking about survival. He was talking about something deeper. Zara took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "What if it's not enough?" she asked. "What if you do everything right, and it still isn't enough?" Jack turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity. Then you do it again, he said simply. And you keep going. Because that's all you can do. Zara felt something stir within her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. It was a strange and unfamiliar sensation, like a distant memory she had long forgotten. Hope had been something she had abandoned years ago, buried beneath the weight of war and survival. But now, standing here in front of this human, she was beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than simply enduring. Jack's gaze softened, as if sensing the shift in her. It's not easy, he said, his voice almost a whisper. And it's not always clear. But if you're lucky, you'll find someone along the way who'll help you see the light. Zara didn't know how to respond. She wasn't sure she believed in luck, or in finding someone who could truly help her see the light. But as she looked at Jack, standing there with a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him, she felt a flicker of something inside her. Something she hadn't felt in years. Something worth fighting for. Jack shifted his weight and gestured toward the pass. Come on, he said. We should get moving before the weather changes again. We've got a long way to go. Zara hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt as though it might just be worth finding out. Together, they turned and began walking through the pass, the wind now at their backs, and the weight of the storm no longer pressing down on them. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Zara felt a quiet confidence building within her. For the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The air grew colder as they walked further into the pass, but Zara barely noticed the chill now. Jack's presence beside her seemed to block out everything else. It was strange, this feeling she had. She had been alone for so long, surrounded by her people's expectations, the weight of her mission, and the loneliness that came with being the last of her kind in a harsh universe. But now, with Jack walking beside her, the silence didn't feel so heavy. The wind howled again, pushing snow across the path, but this time it wasn't just the storm they had to face. It was the unknown. Zara didn't know what would come next. Would Jack continue to stand by her side, or was this just another fleeting encounter that would fade once they reached their destination? She glanced at him, noticing the way his shoulders moved with an easy confidence. He wasn't in a rush, and yet, he moved with purpose. You seem different, she said after a long stretch of quiet. Jack glanced at her, one brow raised. How so? He asked, his voice light, but his gaze steady. I don't know, she said, shaking her head. There's something about you. The way you handle everything. It's like nothing ever really bothers you. Jack chuckled softly, his eyes meeting hers with a gentle understanding. It's not that nothing bothers me, he said. It's just that I've learned that worrying about everything isn't going to help. Sometimes, you just have to keep going, no matter what happens. Zara took in his words, her mind racing. She had spent so much of her life running, fighting, surviving. But she had never thought about simply moving forward without fear of what might come. She had been conditioned to protect her people, to always think 2 steps ahead. But Jack, he seemed to embrace uncertainty, and there was something about that intrigued her. And what if it's too much? She asked, her voice softer now. What if you can't keep going? Jack stopped walking for a moment, his eyes studying the ground, as if considering her question. Then he looked up at her, his expression serious. Then you find a way to take a breath. You find something, someone, to remind you why it's worth it. Zara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected such a simple answer, and yet, the depth of it hit her harder than any strategy or plan she had ever made. She had always thought strength came from survival, from fighting, from being prepared for every possible outcome. But maybe Jack was right. Maybe it wasn't about fighting against the world, but about finding a reason to keep moving forward, even when everything seemed impossible. They continued on, the path winding through the snow-covered mountains, the storm now at their backs. Zara wasn't sure where they were going or what awaited them, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel as though she had to figure everything out on her own. Maybe there was something to be said about sharing the journey. Do you ever get scared? She asked after a while. Scared of what? Jack's voice was curious, but there was no hint of fear in it. Zara hesitated, then shrugged. Just scared that you might be wrong, or that everything might fall apart. Jack was silent for a moment before he spoke again. Yeah, I get scared, he admitted. But I don't let it stop me. Fear is a part of the journey. It's how you face it that makes the difference. Zara smiled softly. She wasn't sure she fully understood what Jack meant, but she knew that for once, she didn't feel so alone. Together, they walked on, through the snow and into the unknown. The storm had passed, but something else, something warmer, had begun to grow between them. And for the first time, Zara wondered if maybe, just maybe, she could learn to face whatever came next, not with fear, but with hope. The cold had settled into Zara's bones, but there was something comforting in the rhythmic sound of her footsteps as she walked beside Jack. They had been trekking for hours, the snow gradually thinning out as the terrain began to change. The mountains that had loomed so close now seemed to recede into the distance, revealing stretches of icy plains ahead. Despite the relentless cold, Zara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was calm, and every now and then, Jack would glance at her, offering a small smile. That was more reassuring than words could ever be. "We're almost there," Jack said, breaking the silence. Zara turned to him, intrigued. "Almost where?" she asked. Jack shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Wherever we're going," he said simply. "I'm not sure either, but we'll find it." Zara chuckled softly. She had always prided herself on knowing the endgame, on having a clear direction and purpose. But now, with Jack beside her, she realized how much she had been focused on the destination rather than the journey. It wasn't about where they were going. It was about who she was with and what she was learning along the way. As they continued walking, the landscape ahead seemed to open up. The air felt fresher, less oppressive. Zara could see small clusters of alien flora poking through the snow, a hint of color against the otherwise barren land. It was a reminder that life, no matter how small or fragile, could still thrive in places where nothing seemed to survive. "How do you keep going?" Zara asked suddenly. Jack glanced at her, his eyes narrowing in thought. "What do you mean? How do you stay so steady?" "So sure," Zara asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "You just seem so calm, even in the hardest moments." Jack smiled, a wry smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's not about being calm," he said. "It's about knowing what's worth fighting for." Zara thought about that for a moment. She had fought for her people, fought for survival, but in the end, she was left with nothing but emptiness. Jack, on the other hand, seemed to fight for something deeper, something intangible, something that gave him purpose even when the world around him was cold and indifferent. She felt a pang of longing, a desire to understand what that felt like. "Do you think I'll ever find it?" she asked, more to herself than to him. Jack didn't answer right away. He just kept walking, his steps slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. After a while, he spoke, his voice quiet. "I think you've already started," he said. "You're asking the right questions." Zara glanced at him, her heart skipping a beat. He wasn't just talking about surviving. He was talking about living, truly living. She realized, then, that Jack had been teaching her something all along. It wasn't just about strength or survival. It was about finding meaning in the journey itself, finding hope in the small moments. And maybe, just maybe, it was about finding someone who could help you see that. The wind picked up again, biting at her skin, but this time, Zara didn't mind. She wasn't alone. She had someone beside her, and that, for the first time in years, made all the difference. The snow was beginning to thin, but the path ahead was still treacherous. Zara and Jack had been walking for hours, the landscape stretching endlessly before them. As they continued, Zara found herself reflecting on the strange companionship they had formed in such a short time. They were unlikely allies, brought together by fate and circumstance, yet their shared silence was a comfort in its own right. Zara had never been one to rely on others, but something about Jack's presence felt like a steady anchor in the midst of a chaotic world. The wind picked up again, biting at her exposed skin, but she didn't flinch. She had learned something new in the past days, something about resilience and the strength that came from within. Jack, walking beside her, seemed unfazed by the cold, his movements fluid and sure. It was as though nothing could shake him. Zara glanced at him, her curiosity piqued once more. "How do you stay so composed?" she asked, her voice carrying just enough to be heard over the wind. Jack didn't immediately respond, his eyes focused on the path ahead. After a moment, he spoke, his tone thoughtful. "I think it's about acceptance," he said. "You can't control everything, especially not the things that are out of your hands. but you can control how you respond to it. Zara frowned, contemplating his words. She had spent her entire life trying to control every aspect of her fate, fighting against the forces that seemed intent on tearing her world apart. But Jack's calmness, his ability to endure despite the chaos around them, was something she didn't quite understand. Acceptance, she repeated, testing the word on her tongue. Does that mean giving up? Jack shook his head, his lips curving slightly in a rare, gentle smile. No, not giving up. It's about letting go of the need to control everything. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply keep moving forward, even when you don't have all the answers. Zara absorbed his words, her thoughts racing. She had never considered that before. She had always believed that control was the only way to survive, that if she could just plan, prepare, and fight hard enough, she could overcome anything. But Jack's words suggested a different path. A path where strength wasn't just about fighting against the world. It was about learning to flow with it, to adapt. Zara's gaze wandered to the horizon, where the mountains loomed in the distance. They were closer now, the jagged peaks rising higher than she had anticipated. The storm had passed, but the journey was far from over. She felt a strange mix of uncertainty and hope stirring within her. "Do you ever feel lost?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Jack's eyes flickered to her, but he didn't falter in his stride. "All the time," he replied simply. "But being lost doesn't mean you can't find your way. Sometimes, you just have to trust that the path will reveal itself." Zara considered his words, feeling the weight of them. She had spent so much of her life trying to find the right path, the one that would lead her people to safety. But what if, like Jack, she needed to stop forcing the journey and simply let it unfold? They walked in silence for a while, the snow crunching beneath their boots, but Zara didn't mind the quiet anymore. She wasn't alone, and maybe, for the first time, she didn't have to know everything. The world around her was vast, unpredictable, but perhaps that was okay. Perhaps the journey, in all its uncertainty, was enough. As the mountains grew closer, Zara found herself standing a little taller, her heart a little lighter. Jack had given her something more than survival. He had given her a glimpse of what it meant to truly live. The path ahead was still unknown, but for the first time, Zara wasn't afraid to walk it. The sky began to darken as they moved further into the valley, the cold creeping into Zara's bones despite the layers of clothing she wore. The mountains, now towering on either side, cast long shadows over the ground, making the landscape feel even more vast and desolate. Zara glanced over at Jack, who seemed completely at ease despite the overwhelming silence that had settled between them. His eyes were fixed on the path ahead, his pace steady, as though the harsh terrain and the encroaching night were no match for his determination. She admired his resilience. It was something she had never quite understood until now. In her world, survival was a constant struggle, a fight that demanded every ounce of strength, every bit of planning. But Jack made it look effortless. There was a peace in him that Zara couldn't quite explain. "How do you do it?" she asked, her voice almost lost in the wind. Jack turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge her, but he didn't break his stride. "Do what?" he asked. "Stay calm," she said, her words a little sharper than she intended. "No matter what happens, you just keep going." Jack's expression softened, and for the first time, he slowed his pace just enough to match hers. "I've learned not to waste energy on things I can't control," he said. "The world's always going to throw something at you, but you don't have to let it decide who you are. That's your choice." Zara mulled over his words. For years, she had fought to control every aspect of her life, every decision, every outcome. It was how she had survived, how she had kept going when all seemed lost. But Jack's words, they spoke to something deep inside her, a place she had buried long ago. The need to control, the need to fight against the world, had always been a shield for her, a way to avoid the vulnerability that came with trust. But now, she wasn't sure. Was it possible that letting go, just a little, might be the key to finding peace? "And what about the things you care about?" Zara asked quietly, glancing over at him. "What happens when they're threatened?" Jack's expression grew serious, and for a moment, Zara saw something flicker in his eyes, a flicker of something deep and raw, something she couldn't quite name. "You protect them," he said simply. "You don't let fear control you. But you also don't fight just for the sake of fighting. You fight because it matters." Zara felt a knot tighten in her chest. It was a simple answer, but it resonated with her in a way that she hadn't expected. She had always fought to protect her people, but she had never thought about the deeper reasons behind her battles. Was she fighting because it mattered, or was she fighting because it was all she knew? As they continued their journey, the valley seemed to open up, revealing a small clearing in the distance. Zara could see the faint outline of a structure, a place to rest, perhaps. She felt a quiet relief wash over her. They had made it through the worst of the storm, and the path ahead, though uncertain, seemed less daunting now. For the first time in a long while, Zara allowed herself to feel something other than the constant weight of survival. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the endless battle. Maybe, with Jack beside her, there was something worth fighting for. As they reached the clearing, Jack glanced at her, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You're not alone," he said softly. "Not anymore." Zara didn't know why those words affected her so much. Maybe it was the truth in them, or maybe it was the first time she had allowed herself to believe them. But as they stepped into the clearing together, Zara felt something stir within her, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The clearing was quieter than Zara had anticipated. The distant mountains stood like silent sentinels, their peaks shrouded in mist. The sky above was tinged with a pale orange hue as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ground. Zara and Jack had arrived at a small outpost, a place that seemed out of place in the vast wilderness. The structure was worn, with a few lights flickering weakly through the windows. Zara could hear the creak of wood as they approached the entrance, the wind still howling through the trees behind them. Jack didn't seem fazed by the stillness. He moved with a quiet confidence, stepping forward as though he knew exactly what to do next. Zara followed, her thoughts still racing from their earlier conversation. She had always believed that survival was the end goal, the ultimate prize. But Jack's words had opened a door in her mind, one that she wasn't sure how to close. The journey, the process, had always been a fight for her, but now, she was beginning to understand that perhaps the journey itself was worth more than the destination. Jack pushed open the door to the outpost, and they entered. Inside was a simple space, with a few sparse furnishings, a table, some chairs, a low bed against the wall. It wasn't much, but it was a refuge, a place where they could rest for a while. Zara couldn't help but notice how comfortable Jack seemed in the space. His eyes scanned the room with ease, and he immediately started to unload his pack, setting it down by the door. Zara, however, felt strangely unsettled. This wasn't her home, and it hadn't been since she left her own people behind. She had learned to survive, but she hadn't learned how to feel at peace. As Jack moved around the room, gathering supplies, Zara stood still, her eyes on the window that looked out toward the horizon. The world beyond felt distant, a place she could no longer grasp. But there was something about Jack's presence that made her feel connected, if only for a moment. Jack glanced at her, sensing the shift in the air. "You okay?" he asked, his voice steady, yet soft. Zara nodded, though she wasn't sure what to say. "Yeah," she muttered, her gaze still fixed on the view outside. "Just thinking." Jack didn't push her. He knew better than to force someone to share their thoughts when they weren't ready. Instead, he continued preparing their temporary refuge, setting up a small fire in the corner. The warmth began to spread, and with it, a sense of comfort Zara had almost forgotten. As the fire crackled, Zara finally spoke, her voice quieter than usual. "I never really thought about what happens after we survive," she said, almost to herself. Jack stopped what he was doing and looked at her, his expression open and understanding. "Most people don't," he replied. "Surviving becomes the focus, and everything else just falls away. But once you get through it, you realize there's more. There's always more." Zara didn't know how to respond. She had always been driven by the need to survive, to push forward no matter the cost. But Jack had shown her a different side of life, a side where surviving was just the beginning, not the end. As the night settled around them, Zara felt a quiet shift within herself. She had spent so long focusing on the fight, the battles, the constant struggle to stay alive. But now, for the first time, she
realized that there was more to living than just surviving. And as Jack sat by the fire, the flickering flames casting soft shadows on his face, Zara felt herself begin to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find peace. Not by fighting, not by running, but by simply being present in the moment. Jack's voice broke through her thoughts. We've come a long way, he said, looking at her with a hint of a smile. But the hardest part is still ahead. Zara met his gaze, her heart beating a little faster. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. Together. The morning came with a muted light, casting a soft glow over the clearing where Zara and Jack had spent the night. The fire had long since died out, leaving only the scent of burnt wood and the faint warmth that lingered in the air. Zara woke first, her body sore from the long journey, but there was a different kind of exhaustion settling in. It wasn't the physical kind. It was something deeper, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Jack was still asleep, his breathing steady, a quiet rhythm that seemed to match the calm around them. Zara took a moment to watch him, her thoughts drifting as she considered the journey that had brought them to this point. She had never expected to find someone like Jack, someone who could make her see the world in a different light. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about finding purpose in the moments between the struggles. She stood up slowly, stretching her stiff muscles, and made her way to the edge of the clearing. The landscape stretched before her, wild, untamed, but beautiful in its simplicity. It reminded her of the world she had once known, before everything had changed, before survival had become the only goal. Jack stirred behind her, his voice groggy as he woke up. "Morning," he said, his eyes still half closed as he sat up. Zara didn't turn to him right away, instead taking in the view one more time. "It's beautiful here," she said quietly. Jack smiled, his expression softening. "It is," he agreed, standing up and stretching. "But it's just a place. What matters is what we do with it." Zara turned to face him, her heart heavy with a new understanding. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "It's not about where we are, but what we choose to do with the time we have." Jack nodded, the faintest hint of a smile on his lips. "Exactly. We're not here for answers, Zara. We're here to keep moving, to make a difference, even if it's just for one person." Zara felt a lump form in her throat, but she swallowed it down. There was something about Jack's words that made everything seem possible. She had always focused on the bigger picture, the grand scheme of things. But now, standing here with Jack, she realized that maybe it was enough to just make a difference where they could. One moment, one choice, one person at a time. As they packed up their things and prepared to leave the clearing, Zara felt a sense of anticipation growing inside her. The path ahead was still uncertain, but that didn't scare her anymore. For the first time, she felt ready to face whatever came next. And maybe, just maybe, she could help someone along the way, just like Jack had helped her. They left the clearing together, their steps in sync, the weight of the journey now shared between them. The sun had risen higher, casting its warm light over the snow-covered terrain, and Zara could see a new horizon ahead. It was still unknown, but it didn't matter. They would face it together.